Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Scrutiny Management Panel meeting. Thank you for so many of you for coming along and attending. My name is Councillor Matt Atkins. I'm chair of the panel. Just before we begin, I would just draw your attention to some brief safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations, if you signed in to the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Can I also draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed and the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you've finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understand that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Excuse me. Just to mention before we begin that we have one apology from Councillor Scott Pater-Harris. I believe Councillor Simon Bosher is standing deputy for him. Can we now go around the room quickly as possible and introduce ourselves just so everybody knows who we are? Do you want to start to my left and move round? Thank you.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Councillor Mark Jeffries, St Thomas Ward.
Dave Ashmore, Councillor for Fratton Ward.
Abdul Kadir, Councillor for Baffins Ward.
Darren Sanders, Councillor for Baffins Ward and Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness.
Councillor Gemini, Paulsgrove Ward, also Chair of TEX.
If we could maybe just jump actually back up to the back row and we'll carry it left to right.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
Hayley Chivers, Transport Planning Manager.
Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
I'll jump down to the front here for you, Leo.
Leo Madden, Member of the Panel. Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward.
And up to the very back, if possible.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Moretti Hughes, Assistant Director for Buildings.
Doug Gray, Parks Operations Manager.
Claire Watkins, Business Manager.
Councillor Ryan Brent, Chair of the Education and Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel.
Councillor George Fielding, Chair of Economic Development, Culture and Leisure Scrutiny Panel.
Councillor Graham Heaney, St Jude Ward and Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Management Panel.
Councillor Simon Bosher, Drayton and Farlington, standing in for Councillor Scott Pater-Harris.
Thank you very much, everybody. Do we have any members of the panel with interests to declare? Or members of the council, I suppose. Right, the first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes for the meeting held on the 4th of February 2022 and the special meeting held on the 27th of September 2022. Those are pages 5 to 16 in the attached report. I don't know how many members who were at the 4th of February meeting are in fact present, but I will simply approve those minutes as correct by assent unless there is any dissent. So does anybody have any dissent or issues with the minutes of the 4th of February 2022 Scrutiny Management Panel meeting? No, I will take that as assent then, and those minutes are approved. I think more of us were at the meeting on the 27th of September 2022, but I'll follow the same procedure. Does anybody have any issues, any dissent with the minutes of the 27th of September? Councillor Heaney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a minor amendment on page 15. The motion was proposed by Councillor Judith Smythe, not Councillor Judith Symes.
Yep, that seems like a sensible amendment to the minutes. James, have you recorded that? Okay, is everybody content to approve the minutes with that alteration? Right, thank you. So with that alteration, the minutes are approved. Next we have agenda item 4, updates on the work of the scrutiny panels. We have received a report which provides updates on the work of the panels and the last work that all those panels were undertaking. Obviously, scrutiny has been significantly disrupted by COVID in some cases, and some reports that are on the docket for some of the panels are older, some are newer, some had completed reports and sent them to Cabinet and now need fresh updated work. So we also have a refreshed suite of documents to support the scrutiny process, updated work programme templates, scoping documents and topic filtering flowchart for consideration. And so today the aim of this meeting is to take updates from the chairs of each of the panels, if they're ready to provide them, on the work that they wish to continue, or if their topic is very old, if they wish to change. And therefore for this panel to approve and populate the work of the panels so that the panels are pushing ahead with scrutiny topics and aiming for future reports. So I might go round the panel chairs who are present and ask them to update the Scrutiny Management Panel on the work that they're currently undertaking. There will be a chance for members to ask and discuss any questions. So can we start? I had a request to start with Councillor Ryan Brent, unless anyone has an objection, because he has to leave urgently after the meeting. So if there's no objection, Councillor Brent, can you update us on the work of the Education, Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel?
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this reasonably brief. So the previous topic that the panel were looking at was to do with placement. So I'm just going to read through what I've sort of got. And we decided to agree to abandon the review because we feel that it's out of date now. So I've been talking to the directors, and actually a lot of work's been taking place about short breaks. There's recently been a pilot SEND inspection, which was very robust and looked at the most vulnerable children. The City Council came out of this well, and there were no concerns raised. It wouldn't seem the wisest use of this scrutiny panel's time to continue to look at this topic. Therefore, I'm here today to try and propose a topic for SNP members to agree for us to move forward to ensure a report is brought back by the end of this municipal year. The topic, after discussion with the panel, was school attendance in transitional years, with a particular focus on years 6 and 7, and how the City Council can support pupils to transition from primary to secondary school, and then again to secondary to further education. As a further education lecturer, we've had a conversation about any personal interest that I may have, and from legal advice I don't believe that there will be any issue with us taking this topic forward. But the plan will be for the scrutiny panel to do a piece of work on a very narrow topic to ensure that a report is published for the next academic year as well as the next municipal year, so that the Cabinet can then look at the recommendations that the panel put forward to see if we can make an improvement on that specific topic. I don't anticipate we're talking much longer. If there's any questions, happy to take them, Chair.
Thank you very much. It might be simplest, I think, to address questions immediately to each chair so that we can keep in mind what they've said. So do any members of the panel have any questions for Councillor Brent and the Education, Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel? Yeah, Councillor Corkery.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if Councillor Brent could update the Scrutiny Management Panel on why the Scrutiny Panel that he chairs hasn't met for a considerable period of time.
I think, as the Chair has mentioned, the scrutiny management, COVID obviously led to a few disruptions in some of the scrutiny panel's meeting. There's a lot of informal scrutiny work that happens between members of scrutiny panels and chairs of scrutiny panels and directors, not behind closed doors, but not necessarily in view of the public. There has been work that's undergone. There's been good communication and correspondence with myself and the relevant Cabinet member, Susie Horton. We try and look at scrutiny as a positive move forward rather than necessarily a challenge to the administration for any reason. So for me, there has been work taking place. It just hasn't necessarily been in the public arena. I don't think there's anything more I can add.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Brent.
Has the panel actually met this year, in this council year?
Have you had any formal or informal meetings thus far?
So there's been informal meetings, again, nothing in the public arena. Happy to ask any of your members of their political persuasion whether or not they've been involved in anything. We had an informal meeting last week with one of the directors, because the other director unfortunately is ill, to look at where we are. And actually it was a very good open discussion about what's the best use of scrutiny in the education, children, young people area. No formal meetings, but a lot of informal work and scrutiny.
Thank you. Anybody else? Just to confirm in relation to the previous topic, were all members of your panel happy to move on, and was there any objections raised moving on? Because obviously, on the face of it, does sound like an important topic that was being considered before, the question of disabled children and their support. So were there any issues with moving on that, anything that could potentially form part of your workload in the future, or do you feel that topic is now satisfactorily dealt with by the Council?
From the input the directors have given us, that they believe, and the advice that they had given us, that it would not be a good use of scrutiny time to move forward. I think that this topic has been looked at as satisfactory as can be. It's not an issue at present for the Council, the administration or the Directorate, and therefore I would be requesting that we close the report. Okay. I'm sorry, could you just remind the panel what it is that you propose to move on to scrutinise again now, very briefly? Yep, so we're looking at school attendance, more so educational attendance with specific look at transitional years to improve attendance. And the one thing I didn't say, which I will say, whoever is the chair, if it is me next year of this scrutiny panel, we want to look at out-of-city placements. And I know that's a conversation for another day, but we're trying to look towards sort of where's our 2-3 year plan with scrutiny rather than sort of looking at one topic at a time. Excellent, thank you. Some members of the panel, does anyone have any comments on the education panel moving on to look at school attendance? Councillor Heaney, I saw you indicating.
Yeah, sorry, not so much to look at the current one. I don't have a problem with that, and I think it's really down for the members. They may have more direct knowledge of their area than I necessarily would. I mean, I'm just interested in, I did a little look back at the record of the various scrutiny panels. I noticed the education children and young persons hadn't met between January 2020 and January 2021. It's a whole year, and I was just wondering whether there was any reason for that, or whether officers were unable to support scrutiny, or whether there was any problem, because effectively, I suppose, from about July, August, well, yeah, but I've looked at that, July, August 2021 through to the summer of 2022 would be obviously COVID related, and that clearly is where there was practically no opportunity to do scrutiny for understandable reasons. But I was interested in the period from January 2020 to 2021, whether it was to split with COVID or whether other things were going on.
I suppose there's two places I could direct that question. Firstly, to the officers, I have some recollection that when COVID hit, scrutiny management, because obviously we were not able to hold meetings in person, which meant that quite a lot of meetings couldn't have formal decisions taken at them until we were allowed to take formal decisions online. That affected scrutiny quite heavily, didn't it? I feel like scrutiny was therefore shut down for a period because it couldn't take formal decisions. Am I right about that? Does anyone have any clear recollection of that?
I think you're right.
So I think there actually was a closed period on scrutiny meetings, but do you have any comments, Councillor Brown, if there were any other issues that you found in holding scrutiny meetings with your panel in that time?
No, I mean, I'll always talk to and respond to members of the panel, the scrutiny panel, if there's any requests for any meetings, which I haven't had any specific requests for any of the panel members to look at any specific topics or even for any informal meetings. I've gone about it, and again, always ensuring that the Cabinet member, Susie Horton, is involved about where the panel is best utilised for scrutiny. I haven't got anything further to add really on the issue of meetings not taking place.
Yeah, Councillor Colbury.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back directly on that question, I think that you raised around whether scrutiny has been taking place during that period or whether COVID had precluded that from taking place. The Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel that I was previously involved in, during that period, met 5 times over the period that the other panels didn't meet at all.
That was via online meetings, was it? Or?
Off the top of my head, I think all of those were in person, so kind of taking place at times that there obviously wasn't a lockdown, but I'd have to double check to be certain.
Councillor Bosher.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on the comment that Councillor Brent made, just looking at his particular panel, I noticed that Councillor Ashmore in the Chamber, Councillor Mark Jeffrey standing deputy in the Chamber, and Councillor Abdul Qadir also in the Chamber standing deputy for the panel. Can Councillor Brent advise whether he's had requests for meeting from any of those three particular councillors?
I've had no request from the members mentioned, but I will always continue to work with directors throughout any municipal year to ensure that scrutiny is upheld to the best degree.
Yeah, through the chair, please. I mean, I don't know if any of the members named wish to comment on that in any way.
Yeah, I didn't realise standing deputies could hold meetings, but I'd have thought the chair and people on the panel would be the first call.
Yes, I mean, I think it's also...
Can I also just clarify, do the chairs get money for being scrutiny chairs?
I think that's a matter of open budget record, and I think every year the chairs have a stipend increase in relation to being chair of the scrutiny panel, which it's fair to say other members of the panel don't get. I think it's also worth noting, however, because I don't want this meeting to turn into an accusatory meeting about particular individual members, what they did or didn't do over the course of COVID. Different departments and different offices will have had different workloads, as will different cabinet members supporting scrutiny, and the individual council members obviously had significant pressures placed on them by COVID. I don't think that will have been completely even on everybody, and I think that the council, worked hard during COVID. I think people, by and large, went above and beyond, and so I don't want to get into criticism of how scrutiny functioned over that period. I would prefer to look forward to the plans that we have for the future and how we can perhaps make scrutiny function more effectively going forward, and ensure that it does provide a useful service for the council, that it does ensure that as councillors we're fulfilling our responsibilities to make sure the public money is spent well and services are provided well to the public. So I appreciate that looking at it, it does look like a number of the panels, or certainly there's been unequal work produced by the various panels. It should also be noted that some of the panels, I mean, I was on TEX last year, we produced two reports and had a large number of meetings, but both of those subjects had arisen out of council motions where particular councils had raised particular issues. It wouldn't surprise me looking, for example, at the disability motion, if that had arisen out of a specific issue at the time, because I seem to recall 2-3 years ago there were questions around respite care, around some individual cases as funding from the government changed in that area. So scrutiny topics don't arise evenly either. So while I think this panel might make a general comment that scrutiny clearly didn't function quite as it should during COVID in all panels, it's assigning individual responsibility for that I'm not sure is directly helpful, and I think there's a wide range of reasons which I'm not sure it's helpful to get into why that may have happened. The other members of the panel are free to disagree if they wish, but that is my perspective, having looked back over the various files and reports. Is any other comments on that, or is the Scrutiny Management Panel prepared to approve that the Education, Children's and Young People Scrutiny Panel proceed with their plan to investigate school absences, particularly in transition years? Any objections to that? That's approved by assent then. Thank you for coming along, Councillor Brent, and I wish you well with the investigation and the report. Can we now move to Councillor, next to the first one on the agenda was Councillor George Fielding and the Economic Development, Culture and Leisure Scrutiny Panel for a report and an update on your work.
Thank you, Chair. We have been considering a review topic that was approved prior to the COVID outbreak. We've had one informal meeting prior to New Year where we discussed whether to continue with that topic or to consider a new topic. It was the overall opinion of the panel that we should continue with the topic, which is relating to access to culture and leisure across the city, in particular those less fortunate and deprived, and considering the council's offering of the leisure card. So that is something that we want to continue forward. We've had one formal meeting since then, meeting at the tennis centre adjacent to the Mountbatten Centre, where we took a panel of leisure providers throughout the city, including the Andrew Simpson Centre, BH Live and their liaison partner through the council, and also the city's university in terms of their leisure provision. It was very useful to have that update and to get the panel back working, and we are aiming to have meetings every fortnight in order to get the review through prior to PERDA. One request from the panel was also that we consider a secondary topic following visits to the museum stores. We're aware that there's a significant amount of civic assets that are being stored and not able to be put on show publicly, but we're concerned about the condition that they're kept in, that there may be some degradation to the assets which would have an impact on cultural assets across the city. So that's a smaller review topic that we've considered and would like to do a review concurrent with the existing review. And again, we should be able to, that's a smaller topic and should be able to produce a report prior to PERDA this year. So things are happening. And yeah, we had good attendance at both the informal meeting and the formal meeting. So panel members are keen and willing to get engaged.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fielding. Anyone any questions for Councillor Fielding in regards to the work of the Economic Development, Culture and Leisure Scrutiny Panel? Councillor Corkery.
Same question asked of Councillor Brent. Can you explain why there haven't been any formal meetings for a considerable period of time?
Thank you. In terms of the period prior to the last meeting and the current meetings, obviously we have had the COVID pandemic that affected scrutiny across the council. There was a slow uptake for panels to necessarily meet, and I hadn't had any communication from any of the panel members or standing deputies to convene meetings. But now that we've got better engagement with democratic services in terms of what they are able to offer in terms of support for the panels, we have an allocated officer now that will ensure that meetings are regularly timetabled and that we continue on the good work of the panel.
Anyone else? Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't know if other members of the panel wish to comment on the reviews which are currently being undertaken. I think that the widening social participation in our city is an extremely valuable topic and is worthy of considering further review. Could I just quickly ask, Councillor Fielding, is there work outstanding? Because obviously it was a little while ago the last work was done on the topic. Is there work you can use from the previous work that was done, or will it need to kind of restart, do you think, and interview the same people again?
We'd had two formal meetings from the previous period. In terms of the content of those meetings, they probably just need to be refreshed and updated, but I don't feel that it had to necessarily be abandoned and restarted. We've put in a schedule of meetings including different topic areas for the next 3 to 4 meetings, so we're wanting to progress it as quickly as possible to get different witnesses to the panels so that we can produce a good and worthy report that brings recommendations to Cabinet.
Excellent. So I think I agree that one will also needs time taken over it to be produced in detail, because I think it's a difficult question and an important one for the city. Any comments on the review into the state of current assets held in storage? Did you consult with officers in regards to that topic and whether or not they think it's an important one to investigate?
A number of the panel members had been on visits to the stores themselves with officers, so we're fully aware of the situation. We've not engaged specifically with officers to say this is a topic we'd like to consider, but believe they would also be keen to see it, because they, when visiting the sites, they have placed on record the concerns that they have in terms of the condition and environmental protection that there is there for community assets, cultural assets.
Any comments on that topic from the panel? No, I think that's a valuable thing, and I think I agree it shouldn't take too long, but I think it's very important that we don't allow, and again, probably has not been a priority, our storage assets during COVID, so it's important we now review their state and their storage. Is the Scrutiny Management Panel happy to approve the work as suggested by Councillor Fielding, continuing the report on widening social participation in Portsmouth's heritage assets, and also start a new work stream, a shorter work stream into investigating the current state of heritage assets? Unless there are any objections, I'll take that as approved. Approved. Thank you very much. Right next on the list, Councillor Gemma New. Could you give us a brief update on the Traffic Environment Community Safety Scrutiny Panel work? Thank you.
So my panel's met. We finished 2 reports, which was also fed to Cabinet. The recommendations were agreed on that. And that was to do with the transportation, accessibility of the transport network, and the other one was to do with biodiversity. They were fed back to Cabinet, as I said. We are now looking at the motion that went through in July for phasing out pesticides and weed killers in Portsmouth. We've not met formally until March, purely because we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes informally. A lot of it is seasonal. I've been working with my panel members, with officers behind the scenes, looking at different things. Lots of things have been changed. We've done an informal meeting last week. Some things have been tried. It's trial and error on this sort of thing as well. So, and obviously because it's the seasonal effort of it as well and stuff, there's lots of things to take into account, weather and whatnot. And then we've been looking at what other areas have been doing with this sort of thing as well, Southampton and stuff. And we're keen to look at this and carry it through.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Councillor New in relation to the Traffic Environment Community Safety Panel? No? Good. So, in terms of the report that you wish to produce now, looking into pesticides, that was obviously something that was worked on briefly during the previous report, but is an issue important to members. Have you consulted with officers about whether or not that's reviewed?
Yeah, so we've consulted with officers. We've also got someone coming in from Portsmouth University and COLAS for our formal meeting. Simon Bosher was on our informal meeting last week as well. So hopefully we can get some sort of report fed back with that. We're still collating a lot of information.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the panel on the Traffic Environment Community Safety Panel investigating pesticide use? I know it's an issue that's come up a number of times in the Chamber. Are we all happy to approve that work stream then for the Traffic Environment Community Safety Panel? Unless there's any dissent, I'll take it as approved. Excellent, thank you very much. Moving on finally is Councillor Kirsty Mellor on the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel. Kirsty Mellor's not with us today, is she? No. Okay, Councillor Corkery.
I just wondered, seeing as we're looking back over the last couple of years, whether it would be useful for me to provide a report on my time as chair last municipal year?
Sure, yes. If you were chair last year, you could update us on the work you did last year, and then we'll take as the update from Kirsty Mellor, the report that she's provided in the document. I think SHIP. So thank you, Councillor Corker.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. So, as Chair of the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel, we had a discussion with the panel members, and a topic was brought forward to look at issues with regards to repairs and maintenance services within social housing. This was off the back of lots of casework that myself and I'm sure all councillors get from social housing tenants who wish to raise concerns at various points in time about the service that they think that they are receiving in terms of how their properties are maintained and repaired. So the topic was agreed and we decided to proceed with the scrutiny panel. We were quite keen early on to ensure that, as well as doing what would normally be expected in terms of engagement with officers and external organisations, that we also had the voice of the tenants really at the forefront of what we were looking at. So one of the first actions that we put in place was to design and publish a survey that went out online and social media, addressed to all social housing tenants within the city, Portsmouth City Council tenants, but also those who live in housing association properties, to invite their feedback on the services. And we got quite a good response, got a couple of hundreds, if not I think maybe 300 or so responses to that, which provide us a lot of evidence and data to kind of sift through to then work out exactly where there may be issues that need to be addressed in more detail. And I have to say, kind of thank you very much to officers for facilitating that. I remember one meeting where I was asking why we couldn't just design, publish a survey and get the feedback and analyse the data within a month or so, because that's the timeline we needed to do, to which I think I got lots of gasps of exasperation, but we managed to do it in the end. So I do thank people for accommodating that, and particularly obviously the housing officers and those in comms and research that we worked with on that. So, yeah, as I say, we used that survey data, and we also then sent out an invitation to everyone who had responded to the survey to come along to an informal meeting that was held in this room. There was a bit of discussion about whether that should be a formal public meeting or an informal meeting, and I think the conclusion was in the end it should be informal, because people may be more comfortable to discuss their own personal circumstances and issues they've experienced in that kind of informal setting. So that was what was decided, which again I think was a very useful exercise. We had quite a number of social housing tenants who were able to come into the council chamber, sit in the seats we're in, and engage in that discussion about their experiences, both positive and negative. As we said, there were kind of good stuff said about council services, as housing association services, as well as some issues that needed to be addressed. So going forward in terms of the recommendations, if I'll just get those up on my screen to remind myself. One of the interesting things in terms of how the report developed was that it went in a slightly unexpected direction in terms of a large part of the focus, based on the feedback we got, was around capacity of services, and particularly capacity around workforce. So it seemed there was a real kind of issue within repairs and maintenance services that I think is more widely across the economy in terms of shortage of skilled tradespeople, and the impact that was then having. And there was lots of discussion about how that was affecting council services and housing association services, and how people were ending up competing against each other, trying to pick off the best carpenters and the best plumbers, etc., from each other, which obviously isn't helping the overall picture. So one of the key recommendations to then come out of that was about stronger collaboration between the council and other social housing providers around workforce issues and recruitment and development, and also looking forward in terms of how those skills may need to change as time goes on. So particularly aware of obviously the need for kind of mass retrofit of social housing properties to meet higher environmental standards. There's going to be a much higher demand for those kind of skilled trades and companies that can undertake that work. So a kind of recommendation also included to look at that as a piece of work to ensure that everyone's working to the same page and not competing against each other unnecessarily, and collaborating instead. There was also a further recommendation to meet collectively with other local housing providers, to talk about Portsmouth levels around pay and green issues, as I said. To ensure that there was instructions for appliances in individual properties and communal areas. So one of the feedback we got from the survey and from people attending was that sometimes they weren't aware of how, for example, they should operate their central heating system, and whether there was kind of more clear guidance that could be operated at and could be developed around that, to hopefully then kind of minimise calls then on repairs and maintenance services. For example, I've heard stories of plumbers having to go out and show people just how to adjust the heating setting because it's never been explained to them. Clearly there's probably a significant cost to that, to the social housing landlords, in terms of sending the plumber out to do something which potentially could have been addressed at an earlier stage. So ensuring that those kind of simple things are done. To ensure that there were feedback mechanisms where residents are not under immediate pressure to give feedback. So one of the stories we heard was that sometimes tradespeople had visited the property and then asked people to immediately fill out a survey or provide feedback on their work, which may put people in an awkward position. So just thinking about the ways in which that happens and is managed. To continue the residents meeting for council tenants that used to be held before COVID. So the Residents Consortium is a monthly meeting of council tenants and leaseholders that is a really useful forum for people to raise issues and engage with the council at a senior level to ensure that the residents' input is being secured into how policies and procedures are developed. So just continue that good work really, and to recognise that. And there was also a comment there around what happened through COVID. So one of the things we picked up is there was quite a varying experience through COVID. Some people reported that they'd experienced good and normal standards of maintenance and repairs. Other people had given us stories of really long backlogs and delays. So just recognising that and working with housing associations and social landlords to try and address those issues. And then the last one, last but not least, was just to place on record our thanks to all the officers and other organisations and, of course, tenants who have participated in the review and contributed to its findings.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corkery. Any members have any questions on that report? I will, by the way, obviously we have the Cabinet Member present, and so in the next agenda item 5, we will be talking about how the administration and the Cabinet Member and his team have responded to that, so we will be coming to that. Any questions from the panel initially? No, thank you very much, Councillor Corkery, for that update. I will just mention, so the intended work going forward in our report is that the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel wants to conduct a review into the provision of breaks and respite for informal carers, particularly those who care for someone with dementia. And a draft scoping document was attached as Appendix 6, and the panel met to discuss this on the 23rd of September 2022 and agree that topic. I know that this is something which has been in the public eye significantly recently, the question of when family members care for those with dementia or friends, even people within the community, and how we support them in the same way that we do more registered professional carers. Has anyone got any comments or questions on that topic?
Not so much. I mean, just an observation that the panel has actually been on a recent visit to talk to carers. I unfortunately wasn't able to go because it had to be scheduled at a time when I was teaching, but the meeting did actually take place, and I'm sure the Chair will be updating me and other members who weren't able to attend at some point because it was just before Christmas, so there is work going on.
Thank you. So I think we're happy with that topic to proceed and note it as the topic that panel is currently pursuing and reporting on. Everyone happy with that? Now we turn briefly, if you wish, to the new documents which have been attached. So we have the new scrutiny work programme document, the scoping document, and the scrutiny flowchart. Is that correct, James?
Yes, that's correct, Chair. Just to say, Appendices 1 and 2, which is the work programme and the scoping document, are light refreshes of what existed previously. The flowchart is new, and it's something based on guidance from Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and also taking into account some of the questions that the LGAs suggest be asked of scrutiny topics prior to their approval.
Have these documents been conducted by the panels for the recent topics?
Not yet. The panel, the documents are here for adoption by the SNP before they're used by the panels themselves.
Oh, yeah, of course, I see, yeah. But they will go back to the panels when they to complete. It's not for us to complete them.
Yeah, so if the Scrutiny Management Panel is happy to agree these documents, they'll be used in upcoming reviews.
Anyone, any comments, questions on the documents? I, as Chair, quite happy with them. I think the flowchart makes a great deal of sense to make sure that the scrutiny work is being best used. Though it is worth noting, I don't think we're currently inundated with scrutiny topics, so it is good to make use of the time of scrutiny panels on topics that the members are interested in, because I do think it increases the expertise of members and helps actually, from my work on scrutiny panels, in member and officer communication, and sometimes even with different departments communicating with one another. So I think scrutiny work is very valuable, but I think these documents are also useful in clarifying when topics are appropriate. So I'm happy to approve those documents. Shipping side, kind of the recommendation attached to this report, I've slightly been doing a little bit as we go along, but I'll now summarise the entire recommendation unless anyone has any further comments, questions. No, so the recommendation is recommended that the updates received from the theme scrutiny panel chairs are noted by the Scrutiny Management Panel, the updated work programme, template, scoping document and topic filtering flowchart be adopted, and the Council's scrutiny work programme for theme scrutiny panels be populated and updated as appropriate with any topics agreed at the meeting by the Scrutiny Management Panel. Namely, these topics are, in the case of the Economic Development, Culture and Leisure Scrutiny Panel, that they can continue their review into widening social participation in Portsmouth heritage assets, and that they begin the new work stream also looking at the current state and storage of stored heritage assets of the City Council. In the case of the Traffic Environment and Community Safety Scrutiny Panel, that they begin a new work stream looking at the use of pesticides across the city. In the case of the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel, that they begin a new work stream looking at respite care for informal carers. And in the case of the Education, Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel, that they begin a new work stream looking into the attendance of children at local schools, especially in transition years. Is that approved by the members? I'll take it as approved unless there are objections. So approved. Thank you very much. Right, now we can move on to agenda item 5, and I thank all the Cabinet members and officers for attending today. So there were 3 scrutiny reports sent to Cabinet in the early part of this year, 2 for the June Cabinet meeting and 1 for the July Cabinet meeting. The one I think we'll start with is one of the June ones, because Councillor Corker gave such a detailed update on the work of that panel. So could I turn to Councillor Darren Sanders? Can you update the Scrutiny Management Panel on the steps that have been taken to implement the recommendations of the Housing and Social Care Panel review into procedures and performance of Portsmouth City Council and housing associations in relation to response, repairs and maintenance, given the Cabinet recommendations were agreed on the 21st of June 2022? Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I can. Firstly, I wanted to place on record the diligence with which all the chairs of this particular panel have operated across the last 4 years, including during the pandemic, and that's Luke Stubbs, Cal Corkery, and now Kirsty Miller. It's very much appreciated. Certainly I don't see scrutiny as a challenge. Having chaired this panel for 4 years, I'm fully aware of the powers that chairs have to make sure that we as an administration are scrutinised properly. So I'm delighted to have been invited here by you, Matt, to outline this. Now, you may not have heard all of what Cal said, for which I apologise. So I'll go through the recommendations, the Cabinet response and the actions for each of the 7 points. So recommendation 1 was to request the Leader and the Chief Executive to thank various officers involved in the review and the officers attending from the housing associations. The Cabinet response was to agree, but to make sure the letter came from Cal rather than the Leader and Chief Executive, and that letter was sent on the 27th of June 2022 to the relevant people involved, and I want to thank in particular Cal and the rest of the panel for this report, which has been eye-opening in several respects and also very, very welcome. The second point, as Cal said, the idea was to collaborate with local housing providers to upskill the local workforce, including in green technologies, and try and promote career paths. In addition, it was also to meet collectively with other local housing providers around things like pay and green issues. I wanted that expanded to include repairs and maintenance as well, because it's important that everybody learns. So a subgroup covering those issues has already met. It first met on the 7th of October 2022, and the next meeting is planned on the 20th of April 2023. In addition, regular contact and information sharing happens outside of those set meetings by letters and emails. One concept the Cabinet did want to add is that the Council can't directly determine the pay and conditions the housing associations use, much though we'd like to, but we can't. So on the next point, which is, if you pardon me, the next point is point 4, which is to ensure that there are instructions for appliances in individual properties and communal areas. This has become particularly relevant after the horrible and horrific situation that has recently occurred in Rochdale, long after the community report, whereby the local association was found effectively guilty of killing someone and killing a child. That's not acceptable. So various things in addition to the report have been done by the team as a result of that, and I want to include those as well. The Cabinet response to the report was to agree and to introduce a DIY leaflet for all new residents, and also review options for further similar leaflets for residents on things like heating and operating windows. There will be further information articles to help residents, as Cal has said, understand how their homes work. I'm particularly aware of a social housing development in my own ward at Copner Green, which is incredibly green, and none of the residents knew how to work the system. So we want to try and do that, and that will be included in future editions of the quarterly House Talk magazine. Doyle Avenue, our new council housing development in Hilsea, will also experiment with different ways of supporting residents moving into the properties to make sure that the new technologies they actually know about. We also want to try and do that with the passive house developments that we're wanting to do initially in Havant and in future in elsewhere. So the actions resulting from that are essentially they're complete, but it always will go on. So the DIY leaflet has been provided to all residents. An article is included in the spring edition of House Talk, particularly with regards to condensation. A condensation leaflet to help residents understand and manage that in their own homes is being prepared. In addition, I have also asked the team to take a look at all the systems that are available following the recent horrific events in Rochdale to make sure that we do everything we can to try and reduce and remove damp and mould in our homes. I do not want a rerun of what we saw in Windsor House, in Lamport, in our council homes. We are also working with Liberty Gas regarding the preparation of leaflets to help residents use gas boilers. And finally, post-occupancy surveys are being undertaken of new build developments to gain feedback around living in them, and that will inform how effective instructions are when moving in. Point 5 is to consider feedback mechanisms where residents are not under immediate pressure to give it. Again, the Cabinet agreed with that. It's an ongoing work in progress, and updates will be given at future residents' consortium meetings. The action is complete and works are ongoing, Matt. The reports repairs team are now undertaking telephone customer satisfaction surveys on the island. So they're doing it, not the contractor, which was the situation previously. So we are marking the contractor's homework. And when the repair support team have recruited a team to take all of it, that will be expanded to the off-island properties as well. Item 6, as Cal said, is to continue to provide residents with opportunities to give feedback and engage in housing services, otherwise known as the residents' consortium meetings. And we changed that recommendation to resume those residents' meetings, as Cal has said. The residents' consortium has met frequently. And I have to say the issues with the residents' consortium are now not the officers, but the politicians. I'm delighted that Councillor Corkery and Councillor Atwell have frequently attended the Residents' Consortium, and I know their feedback has been immensely helpful to consortium members. I was the only politician who attended for the rent-setting meeting, and their views have involved my own approach to the decision. I'm delighted that that's there. The final point, I think, Cal, was noting that the Council's repairs and maintenance contractors have continued to deliver as close to a normal service as possible through the pandemic. Whilst the housing associations conceded they were now dealing with backlogs, the Council's position was different, and the panel requests that the Leader and Chief Executive place on record a note of thanks to the relevant teams. That was agreed. A letter from the Chief Executive by email, the Chief Executive and the Council Leader was sent by Meredith Hughes, my colleague, via email on the 23rd of December last year. So those were the 7 points, Matt. James Hill and Meredith Hughes are happy to assist me in trying to give any detailed answers the panel may have, but I hope that shows that we're taking this seriously.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanders. If I could now, as the panel, have any questions, Councillor Bosher.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got 2 questions for Councillor Sanders. One's specific to something that you talked about, and also Councillor Corkery mentioned in his summing up of what's been going on, and one's probably a bit more of a generic question. In Councillor Corkery's overview, very detailed overview, thanks Cal, talked in terms of the confusion, shall we say, around controls around things like boilers and other bits and pieces that were clearly costing, because there's a call-out fee associated with that, I would understand. So there is an information blockage with self-help, shall we say. And that is clearly something that has been highlighted and needs to be addressed throughout our housing stock. You, in your summing up, you've talked about passive house development going on in Havant. Now, passive house relies on... Not that. Well, it might do, because it relies on triple glazing, air tightness, mechanical ventilation, heating and cooling. And obviously there is an associated cost with that. So clearly there is a cost premium going with the passive house route as there is going with what you might call a standard build, shall we say. Given that there is a higher degree of control attached to passive house, and I think the instance you were referring to in Rochdale, Kirby, was around the mould and the child that died of mould. What are we going to do? And I'd be interested, and I'm not asking you for a detailed answer now because I'm sure you want to consult officers, around whether, if we go down that route, there's obviously a cost premium. Secondly, what are we going to do about educating tenants in the use of passive house technology? And C, if it is used incorrectly, even though it works on air tightness, you could find yourself with mould and damp issues which you're looking to avoid. Now, I'm not looking to say let's not do passive house, but clearly there is an education process that needs to be associated with this to avoid the situations that you've referred to, both from what Cal is saying, people being called out, how do I control this, and the ultimate danger that's associated with it. So that's my first question, shall we say.
I'm happy to answer each of them, both of them. I'll start with the political overview, if that's all right, Simon, and then Mairead and James can talk in more detail about the practical implications of it. I'm very keen to see how green we can make our social housing stock. We're in a climate emergency. We have to do everything we can. We've had a passive house project already, although strictly speaking it can't be called a passive house project because it's actually a refurbishment, not something new, at Wilmcote House. And that covered our administration and your administration, Simon. And I'm very, very keen to learn the lessons of that, particularly to make sure it doesn't take years to do, which was highly frustrating for everybody. We've chosen these particular areas because it might not work. And that's done on purpose. If it can work here, then we think it can work elsewhere. The reason I mentioned Copner Green is that's very high in my thinking about this, and actually I think it's quite similar to where you're going. That's Code 7 for the Code for Sustainable Homes, which for people who don't know is as green as you can get under the old planning system. And my frustration was that the housing association involved did not do that work that you've outlined we should do around talking to people. Many people in Mull simply didn't know, and that was very frustrating, and that meant they couldn't utilise it properly. So with regards to that, I want to make sure that in addition to the leaflet that we've got to help residents use gas boilers, we can make sure that every resident who moves into any home that we build that's as green as possible actually knows how it works. Because it's that donkey work that you've outlined, Simon, that often is missing. And I don't want that to happen. Does that mean it will always happen and they'll always take notice under every single circumstance? I can't promise that. But our intention is to make sure that we learn from the lessons of Copner Green and also learn from the lessons of Wilmcote House as well. I don't know, Meredith or James, if you want to add anything on the implementation of it all and the technical bits.
Apologies. I'd add to what Councillor Sanders said is that we've just completed in the summer the new properties at Doyle Avenue, and one of the key bits of work then is the post-occupancy surveys that we're doing with the residents in terms of sharing the operating manuals and instructions with residents, etc., but also going back after a month, after 2 months, after 3 months, etc., to check that they can operate, it's fully understandable, it's working effectively, etc. The other key bit, as Councillor Sanders had mentioned about the Enefit block at Wilmcote House, we've done the same with that block, and also as part of our new build works around the passive house buildings, is that the key learning for us will be the post-occupancy. You know, there's 3 stages. There's the initial design, there's the actual build process where we can test whether the local supply chain is competent enough to build to the high standard that we need. But also the key area for us is that post-occupancy, residents in occupation, making sure they can use a building effectively, it meets their needs, etc., and that we're liaising with them and walking through that process continually to make sure that they're getting the best from the building, but we get that full understanding to learn lessons for the next time and the time after that. We've also recently completed a building, Patey Court, up in Paulsgrove, etc. And a lot of the work we did around that in terms of the operating and maintenance manuals was we did a lot of videos as well to make sure that people had that information to hand. They could view it on their mobile phones or on iPads or whatever, so that when they were using equipment they could utilise that and check that they were using it effectively.
If I can, Chair. Yeah, thanks for that. You're sort of echoing the concerns that I have. I mean, obviously, this is sort of my background anyway, but I guess going forward, I don't want your team necessarily to get totally hung up on the fact that passive house is the holy grail when it comes to housing. It obviously is a new development, and it's sort of going forward from an eco point of view. But I also get that we're not going to be building what I would call trying to do this without chucking a typical builder's name is. A lot of house builders have identikit things that they might call them, where it doesn't matter whether you're building them in Portsmouth or Sunderland or sort of Lincoln. They all follow the same principle of design, everything else like that, and follow the same building spec. So I wouldn't want us to go down that route. But certainly over the last 18 months, somewhat during COVID, there are a lot of non-house builders, if you like, but developers, because passive house is essentially not a house builder, it's a theory, so to speak, have moved forward significantly in house design. And it would be useful for your team to explore some of the other things that maybe have happened, because I do share the concern, and I think Mary has put it down very well, when you're having to do walkthroughs and videos and instructions for how to actually use it, that's where I have a degree of concern that is it going to become too complicated for essentially what are tenants who have an interest in this is a property I can live in. If I was going to build one myself, then I'd want to know it chapter and verse, but there is a sort of a sideways stance when you're effectively having tenants in this situation. So I'd be interested to see what other opportunities we're exploring outside of passive house.
I think, again, if I don't want us to take this over because you guys will probably do more detail. If we take, say, the two tower blocks, Leamington and Horatia House, and this is nothing I haven't said to Scott, the former Conservative housing spokesperson, Daniel, the current Conservative housing spokesperson, and Cal, and Tom Coles before him. We want to try and make sure homes are as green as possible. So say, for instance, if you take the two tower blocks, say, take Leamington and Horatia houses, what we've said to the team is we want the rents to be as low as possible and the homes to be as green as possible. That's it. If that's not passive house, that's fine, because then that means we'll have a viable development that will have us at least the same number of council homes going out as we did starting. Those were the two important things. So again, we want to try and do this with relatively small developments in Hampton first. See if it works, see if it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I don't want to die trying. For want of trying, I should say. So it won't always work, Simon. And I think I just want to make sure our homes are as green as possible.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I'm quite happy to have this conversation offline rather than get bogged down in air changes, mechanical ventilation, triple glazing, which I'm sure, looking around the chamber, people really don't want to engage in that conversation here and now, but hey-ho. The second question I've got is more around the general process when it comes to scrutiny, as you as a Cabinet member. Now, my understanding of scrutiny is that the topics can come in two directions, essentially. They can either come from the scrutiny panels, what I would call the themed panels, making that decision, or alternatively it can come from a recommendation from a notice of motion for council, as is the case with the text one and the use of pesticides. So there are two routes there. Those panels decide what they're going to do if it hasn't come from full council. They come to a meeting like this. This is a good example of that. They make their pitch and scrutiny management agree it. And ultimately, when they finish that, it goes to Cabinet, who essentially approve, reject, or whatever the report. Would you agree with me that in all that process, that it is not within the remit of either an individual Cabinet member or indeed the leader of the City Council to dictate to the themed Cabinet, the themed scrutiny committees, what they should or should not be investigating?
You and I both know, when we sat on scrutiny management, when we were in opposition, that we had that. I know that my performance as a scrutiny management panel chairman, in that case, got back to the leader of the council because the people who did it told me. I do not believe that happens now. It certainly has happened with me, and I can only speak for myself. If officers have ideas, they have ideas. There will, though, be times, to be brutally honest, Simon, when, and this happens in other councils, when I've seen scrutiny in other councils, whereby sometimes actually the administration desperately wants, there's a topic that people can't get their heads round, and they ask, and so they are desperate for scrutiny to try and help them because they don't have all the answers. Now, what we've done as an administration is we've set up a series of cross-party working groups. We started with homelessness, because that's a long-term issue, longer than the normal scrutiny panels work, but the key thing is it's cross-party and multi-agency, and that panel, alongside the one in Manchester, is now regarded as an exemplar across the country. We've tried to do that with the local plan, which we all know, we all have disagreements over certain bits of it, and that's fine. And I think, I don't know because I don't sit on it, you might, I don't, that we are inching towards something, I think. But I can answer your question by saying I know that has definitely gone on. It doesn't go on with me.
Thank you very much. Any further comments, Councillor Busher? No. Just on that particular point, if there's any cabinet member present or any cabinet member at all has topics which they would, like scrutinised, which they want scrutiny panel input, I would invite them absolutely to contact the chairs of the individual panels directly, or if they wish to go through this panel by contacting myself and Councillor Heaney. Certainly we can then have that discussion in one of these meetings, or individual panels can discuss the topic, and I'm sure they'd be more than willing to take on topics proposed by the administration. If you like, you have kind of naturally set up and often less politicised cross-party working groups in those scrutiny panels, and they can call in the outside agencies. I recognise that cross-party working groups can sometimes involve those outside agencies sitting as standard, but it isn't outside the remit of scrutiny to call them in and ask them to come and contribute. So if the administration wishes to make greater use of scrutiny panels, absolutely please do so via myself or the chairs of the individual panel. On the topic we're on, were there any further questions about the Housing and Cabinet Member response to the report produced last year? I had a brief thought. Let's see if I can remember what it is and where I've got the housing report response. Sorry. Yeah, here we go. It was around the question of providing information to tenants on how to operate devices they were given, appliances within their home, making sure that there was safety around those things. The recommendation appeared to me to suggest, making sure that information was available publicly, like on a wall, for example, somewhere in each individual building. Has that happened? Is there an online equivalent that they could find easily via Google, or is it still something where you're providing because I think the danger with the leaflets you provide when people move in is they don't really look at them, they go in the bin, they need them later, and they don't have them. So if people want easy, immediate access to instructional material, has updates been made on that point?
Chair, the particular question was related to some of the communal laundries that we operate around the council properties, and the immediate action was to make sure that the appropriate instructions for both using the washers and dryers was in those locations, and we continue to check that on a regular basis.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions... Oh. Okay. Then I will move on from that report. Unless James Hill, your name is down on the agenda if you wish to add any further comments, but don't feel you need to.
The only thing I was going to add is that in addition to the points that Mairead and Councillor Sanders have made, we also will continue to train our officers. So it's not always the case that a contractor has to go out if a resident is inquiring about how to use appliances. We've got a range of officers, particularly in the housing service. We'll continue to train them on how to deal with those typical questions that arise with residents as well. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for you all attending to update us on that report. So if I now move on to the Traffic, Environment and Community Safety Scrutiny Panel review into the accessibility of the transport network, which went to Cabinet on the 21st of June 2022. Councillor Lindstag, thank you very much to you and your Directorate for providing us with a detailed spreadsheet of your responses and work to date. Do you have anything you wish to add sort of verbally about your work on this report?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the panel for asking the questions in the first place. Now, I haven't been involved in scrutiny for many years, and I'm really delighted to see that the panel are holding people to account with the recommendations, because that hasn't always happened in the past. Lots of things were recommended and then not followed up. So it keeps us on our toes. But I would also like to thank the officers who've put in a lot of time to find, there's 40 recommendations, there's a lot of work involved. and particularly, and this is not an excuse, but we are desperately short in transport of staff. I think we're about between 20 and 25% short down on staff, so it's a huge effort on the part of officers. As you said, Chair, the recommendations have been set out in a spreadsheet, so I'm not going to go through all of those. They're there. I'd just like to point out that some of them were already there. We've got a 17-year fully integrated transport strategy, and a lot of this is already in there but may not be online at this moment in time. Some are ongoing, been started, and they're going to take 17 years to be fully complete. Other things will be dependent on funding, because a lot of what happens in transport depends on outside funding. We've been very, very lucky this year. Well, it's not just luck. Officers have put in fantastic bids to the Department for Transport, and we have been very successful in getting huge amounts of funding for various schemes, including BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan. One thing that I've been very concerned about, and officers have shared this with me, and that is that people see bits going on in transport, but not the whole picture. And so we have, I say we, this is the royal we, officers have put together a very full, it's a sort of flagship type thing, explaining transport, explaining what the department is trying to do, the involvement of the department, which will go out to every household. And I think that's next month, February, I believe. So hopefully this sort of sees the picture building up, because what we want is a fully integrated system network of bus routes, cycling, walking, etc. So a lot of the stuff is going in there. And the other thing to remember is that we work with a lot of other organisations. It's there are people obviously like COLAS, with the PFI contract. There are the bus companies and the train companies. There's Solent Transport, which is a partnership between ourselves, Southampton, the Isle of Wight and South Hampshire. And then we've got Sustrans, Cycleform stakeholders as well, who have a huge input into everything. So it's not just on our own. So it's easy, we can say, well, we can do this, but very often we have to consult with and persuade and cajole other outside organisations. So I'll leave it at that, and people can ask questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on the recommendation responses in this particular report? I'd wanted to myself, which I'll proceed with if other panel members don't immediately have anything. So obviously, thank you very much for your detailed responses. And while we were working on this last year and continuing the work that had been done by the previous members of the panel, we did set out, I think, to be ambitious and if anything, to put recommendations in the report that might help you in funding bids and in persuading partners and larger organisations, because there are so many involved in the Portsmouth Transport Network that action needed to be taken in this area. Some things that are encouraging. The responses mention a number of times the BSIP funding that's now been allocated. I wonder if you could just explain briefly, or if an officer could explain a bit more, what that's been funded for and how that's being used, both generally and to meet some of the recommendations in the report.
Well, basically, it is to improve his bus service improvement plan. So it's anything that can be done to improve the bus services. So it's working. We have an enhanced partnership with the bus companies, for example. So they're taking responsibility for some things. Money is being invested as well. And it's looking at... we have identified the things that we need in Portsmouth to make our bus service a lot better, to reach more areas. So it's covering things like... right, going back a bit further than that, if we want more people to come out of their cars and use other methods of getting places, you've got to have good alternative methods. Public transport is a very good example. Buses don't appeal to everybody. The prices are high, they don't reach every place, the reliability isn't there, the timings necessarily, so BSIP will go towards helping that to be replaced by something that is much better. But all of it, of course, depends on people actually using the buses. You know, we can put things in place, but if they're not used, then we're stuffed, basically. I don't know whether Tristan and Hayley have got any more to add to that.
Yeah, just to say that, the whole programme is a series of revenue and capital aspects, so from improved ticketing, service enhancements, improved real-time information, things like that. We've just had a BSIP manager start with us in January who will develop that programme further, and we can bring a report back on some of the detail of that, if that's useful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, yes, Councillor Corkery.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from that line of questioning, in terms of the BSIP and what it is going to be able to do once implemented, I did have a look at the BSIP proposal when it was published a little while ago, and I note that Action 1 on the document that's been provided talks about targeted discount tickets. I wondered if we could just, could that be defined? Because my recollection is I don't remember it talking about discounted tickets. I remember it talking about, I think you say, kind of streamlining the process. So, for example, if someone was to buy kind of 2 singles in a day and a day ticket was actually cheaper, they would automatically get charged the lowest available rate, which is obviously good, but it seems to me that's different from a discounted ticket. So is there also an alternative kind of mechanism or proposal in place where discounted tickets will be available compared to what they would otherwise be?
Well, the idea of the integrated ticketing is that you can actually use the same ticket or tickets on both Stagecoach and First. So at the moment, if you buy a ticket for First, if you buy a return ticket, for example, you can't use Stagecoach and vice versa. So integrated that way, so you have the same ticket available. Eventually, I think we would hope that rail tickets and ferries as well come into it. This is going their stage further with MAS, the Mobility as a Service, whereby you use the Breeze app, and eventually, hopefully, you can actually get a ticket which comes on your smartphone, and where you can get from your house to wherever your destination is, and you have the one ticket, and it can be used on the buses, whichever bus service, the railways, ferries, etc. Is that what you mean?
I guess the question I'm asking is how are we defining targeted discount tickets? Is it, as you say, is it just streamlining the process and making sure that it's integrated, or actually will they be discounted compared to what they currently cost?
Well, hopefully the more people who use the buses would be able to reduce the cost of fares, because they're very expensive compared with many other places. But also there are targeted people, for example, job seekers, so for them to have a lower cost fares, increasing the availability of cheaper fares for up to 19-year-olds, not just the up to 16. Anything else?
Councillor Bosher.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I've got a question, Lynn, and I'm probably more directing this through you at either Tristan or Peter Bolf, actually, but I'll ask the question anyway, because I'm not so sure that you can actually answer it, but that's not, you'll understand why. One of the recommendations talks about working closely with the planning department to obtain contributions from developers towards transport infrastructure in new developments. And the response that came back on that, and I'll just read it if I can, Chair, all new developments that result in additional movement would also generate SIL funding, which can be applied to transport infrastructure. In the cases where specific transport infrastructure is needed, this is also secured by planning obligation, Section 106 monies. Part of the problem, I think, with that is that there is no member engagement as to where that Section 106 money should be spent. And I will give you a specific example and what the pitfall is. We've had 2 big developments in Drayton Farlington, one on what's known as the former SEB site next to Drayton Park. That generated Section 106 money, and it was agreed legally with the developer, and it was used to improve the Grove Road, Easton Road junction. You might remember it, bus was filled in, active lighting and all manner of other bits and pieces. Subsequent to that, we had a new development on what is the old dairy site, almost next door to it. So we added something in the region of about 500 properties side by side. That Section 106 money was also agreed to be spent on exactly the same thing. So we're going to reinvent the wheel and redo the junction again 4 or 5 years after it was originally done, which is crazy. We as ward councillors would like that money spent in traffic calming in and around Springfield School, which is right adjacent to the developments. But the legal problem that we have that's coming back from traffic and transportation is that the legal agreement said spend it on an upgrade at the Grove Road Eastern Road junction. Therefore, if we spend that money elsewhere, we are not meeting our legal obligation with the developer and we may have to give that money back. My problem with all that, and I understand the legalities of it, is if there is engagement with ward councillors at that point, they would have a better view as to where that money should be spent. And therefore, what I'm asking through you is when we have something, because I think my interpretation is right, I don't know whether Peter always frowns at me anyway, is that we have that particular issue when it comes, particularly around traffic infrastructure, that what's agreed between the lawyers, shall we say, on this, is not necessarily always appropriate. And this is a prime example of we spend it on that junction on one development, oh, we're going to spend it exactly on the same junction with the next development. And we're saying that's wrong. Is there a mechanism that we can use with regards to Section 106 in a particular ward where it actually engages with the ward councillors who are most likely to be the ones that will have a better idea rather than lawyers or traffic officers that may be not familiar with the nuances of that particular ward? So you can probably understand why I'm directing the question through you, Lynn. But
yes, yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I've always said ward councillors know their wards best. They may not know the details sort of legally or even sort of engineering-wise, but they are the ones who know where the problems are. Tristan, can you answer that one?
I'll have a go. I think technically 106 and 278 relate to the planning application on the table, so that you wouldn't be able necessarily to take 106 and 278 money and spend it anyway. SIL money, which is more, goes into a general pot and can be spent, and we've used SIL money. We have a small baby SIL, which is the ward bit, but there's also, I think 80% of the SILs goes to a major capital projects pot, and that could be spent anywhere, and that's probably the bit there. But your question, should we be engaged more with ward councillors in the lead up to that so that better decision making can be taken? Absolutely. It's just not always within the planner's remit to say, yes, you should spend that, not here in the red line of the planning application, but somewhere else. There might be in a situation where there's a tangential link where improvements there will actually have an effect on the site, and potentially that's some wiggle room. But yeah, I'd need to look at the Grove Road example to understand what actually happened there, though.
If I can come back, Chairman, just to follow up on that, and I am being ward specific, Lynn will know of the Station Road, Grove Road junction, where we've had 7 accidents there in about 18 months. The last one I actually attended, where there was a car upside down in someone's front garden, and the owners of that property are still waiting for the insurance payout on the rebuilding of the wall since the previous accident. And they are now, with young children, in a situation where they will not go in and out of their front door. They use their back door and their back gate for safety reasons. We are trying to get something sorted out with this junction, and we're getting there slowly. But the problem is that I know that there's about £130,000 worth of Section 106 money for that stretch. But I'm being told we can't use that. We need to find it out of the road safety budget to actually address that situation, which then becomes potentially a political priority for Lynn to make that decision or not. But notwithstanding that, we have a situation where we as ward councillors are going to be asking a cabinet member to spend what is a small pot of money addressing an issue here, when we actually have £130,000 sat there from Section 106 money that we could use to free up her budget elsewhere. The whole situation has a complete disconnect somewhere, and if the ward councillors had been involved with their opinions, if you like, at the point, we would have said, you did that junction 5 years ago, what do you want to do it again for? We want it spent like this, and work so we get a common goal which frees up the traffic and transportation budget to a certain degree as well. All I'm asking for is, can we investigate this mechanism, and it's probably more of a planning thing than a traffic and transportation thing, that actually gets a local view when it comes to Section 106 money, and not what I would call a lawyer and planner view, which is probably in our instance going to be wrong. And I'm sure there are ward councillors representing other wards that might have similar tales to the one that we've got.
I totally agree with you, Simon. Peter, can you look into it, please? Thank you. That should be the 41st recommendation then on your panel.
One of the recommendations.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair. It may well be something that has to be dealt with separately to this report, but obviously this report highlights the fact that it can tap into SIL money to actually do that work. And I guess the third argument is that wards do get SIL money, but there is an argument as to why should I spend the small pot of SIL money that I might have as a ward councillor on a road safety issue, which in theory should come out of traffic and transportation budget, but in this particular instance can come out of Section 106 money.
Thank you very much. I mean, we're going very slightly out of it because this report was about disability, but I do think I'm allowing a bit of latitude because of the developments that clearly occurred in terms of funding access and plans for the bus network. Tristan, did you have one more thing you want to say on that point before maybe we close?
Just to say that the 106 is probably the wrong mechanism for what you want to do, because it's a legal agreement between the developer and the council, and obviously if we don't deliver on that, as you said, they often can't occupy and all the rest of it. So to have something that's outside their control in a 106, I think the mechanism you want to play with is how we spend our SIL money, and that's a capital projects full council decision that normally comes back to you guys.
Can I
just, if I can, on that point, I would disagree to a certain degree, because the conversations I've had with traffic and transportation officers about this is centred around the fact that your officers are calling it the Section 106 contribution. That's why I'm using that phraseology.
And I think the part of what Councillor Bush was saying is perhaps can councillors be involved more in when the 106 agreement is drafted, if it is going to assign money to a specific project. Let's move on from that topic. I had one more thing that related to the same idea, though, which was the question that one of the most important recommendations, and I appreciate we gave a lot, and that was aspirational, as I said, but one of the key ones that actually came out in relation to disabled individuals and their access was that particular bus stops were worse than others, and specific experiences they had sometimes with drivers or other passengers were what made the transport most difficult. And I appreciate those things are difficult to address, but how is the funding being used to address particularly that question of specific bus stops that are problematic, and have we done any work on identifying those bus stops and perhaps the experiences with sometimes drivers not knowing what they're doing
Well, this
correctly?
will all come under the BSIP review. So, but as far as individual problems with drivers, if there have been issues, we then consult with the bus companies to deal with it. So, but the actual location of bus stops will come under the BSIP review.
Yeah, and I think it was also perhaps sometimes about things like curb height and positioning on roads. Is that going to be reviewed as part of it as well? Yeah. Excellent. I just wanted to clarify one of the recommendations as well, given its response. So, recommendation 13 about the planning department investigating where policy can be used to require large-scale developers to consider adapting road schemes to allow bus route with travel through their developments. The point was that where developments, and they often do this, produce a lot of dead ends. We were told by bus operators those are very hard to provide bus routes for because their buses will get stuck down rather small roads with cars parked everywhere. Is that something that we're able to look at for the local plan 2024? I wasn't sure the response quite grasped the idea was, can we look into requiring developers to create through roads in large developments that are easy for bus?
Well, that's already in the strategy, so
okay.
It's highlighted.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that point. Any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Heaney, sorry, you did have a question.
I have two, actually, and hopefully they'll be reasonably short. I referred to recommendation 24, which specifically talks about pavers, but it talks about roads as well. And it's just on the updated information that we got on our new report. I just wanted to clarify. At a recent council meeting, we had a discussion about the maintenance of roads following a motion that was put forward. And if my recollection is correct, I think the Cabinet member did say that she would be asking COLAS to provide ward members with information about the surveys they do so that we know what roads are surveyed when, what the condition is, so that we can get that. Can you confirm that that is still going to be done? Because I thought it might have been included in
yes,
this.
Yes, that is definitely being done, but also COLAS have updated how they survey, the basis on which they survey roads and pavements. And in fact, there's one actually in my ward, in your ward where you live, where we've queried not so much their decision, but the fact that the surface of the underlying concrete is not at its best for the tarmac on the surface to adhere to. So that is being looked into by COLA. So that sort of thing is in hand.
The second question was, I did quickly run through the report again to remind myself, because I read it a long time ago, and I forgot to bring it with me, and I think we saw reference to the idea the council was going to develop a car parking strategy. I know it was subject of a motion, I think, probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm just wondering if you are able to say whether a car parking strategy would be forthcoming in the near future.
Yes, it is. It's in hand. It's not completed by any means, but it is in hand, and it's toxic. It's parking, so it's toxic. Well, but that's possible. I don't know. Pardon?
Thank you very much. I just the car parking strategy was mentioned in one of the recommendations, but perhaps that was the biodiversity report. I think it was the biodiversity report, so I might come back to it in a second or two. The final question I had was in relation to what we think future timescales look like for some of these encouraging developments. So integrated ticketing, where you can buy a ticket that you can use on either bus service in Portsmouth. And also, a number of the responses discussed this Breeze Mass app, which currently integrates the e-scooters and the cycling. I think clearly the buses and trains would be more important to residents. It's good that we've started off with the cycling and the scooters, but what sort of timescales are we looking at, do we think, when we could see?
Well, we had our first board meeting of the BSIP board last week, so we're only just starting, because we've only just had confirmation that we've definitely got the money. It was originally, this is what was allocated but not confirmed, and we've had that confirmed. So first board meeting last week, so that's where we're at on that. So we're just about to start consultation on that, and the Breeze app, well, that's coming on really well, and it's actually had a lot of attention nationwide because it is covering so much, and that on Wednesday there's a future transport forum which I'm speaking at down at the dockyard, and I think we'll have the latest on that then. So I'll get back to people and let people know what the outcome of that is after Wednesday.
Thank you. Councillor Bush, you?
My apologies, Chair. I've got another meeting at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to have to go.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're still quarters, aren't we?
Yes, I have a hospital appointment at 1:30. So.
Okay. I think we're. Does any other member have any further questions on this report? I was just going to add, so will the Breeze app, details of that be included in the communication you're sending out next month to...
Well, yes, I'll get the latest information on Wednesday at the forum. I'll report back to the panel, if you like. I can report back to everybody.
I think it was more the public communication of these things that I was getting answered. But thank you very much. That's very helpful. Unless there's anything that either, that Felicity Tilbury, you're on the list. Anything you want to add?
Felicity can't be here today.
Sorry,
apologies, but Hayley was aptly covering for her. I think you covered most things there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, in that case, we'll move on to the last of the three reports that were sent and updates on the progress of that, which was the Traffic Environment Community Safety Scrutiny Panel review into biodiversity enhancement in urban Portsmouth, sent to the Cabinet and agreed on the 26th of July 2022. Councillor Kimberly Barrett was planning to be here, but unfortunately was called into work at the last minute. So I've got James Hill and Dominique Latouze. Do either of you want to comment on updates that have been made on those recommendations over the last few months?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and again, apologies from Kimberly. I presented the officer response to Cabinet in July, and when I did so, I just drew attention to the fact that the biodiversity scrutiny, its recommendations are very much cross-cutting. They touch on a variety of directorates within Portsmouth City Council and indeed a wider set of partners, no less than regeneration, my own directorate, housing, neighbour and building services, culture and leisure and public health. We've pulled together, since the officer response to Cabinet, a range of meetings between various teams in the City Council and our partners, and we have put together a detailed response to this scrutiny. I'm not clear if that's been shared with you so far. If it hasn't, our apologies, but it is on its way. If not.
So from the link from the agenda to the Cabinet meeting, you can get the Cabinet the response you wrote for Cabinet. Is that the one that you're discussing? Yeah.
In that case, what we've done since is added an additional column onto that report, which will then give you a complete picture of all of the actions that have happened since we tabled that in July, and that would hopefully then give you assurance that in the vast majority of cases all the recommendations are being taken forward. There are a variety that fit into what we described as sort of business as usual. So for Green and Clean Team, Park and Open Spaces, COLAS, they can embed that into their working practice day to day. One of the significant areas which required further work with the strategy unit was around how we make the climate change strategy, which has since been launched and agreed by the City Council, become something which pulls together a variety of work strands which, if we're not careful, can be quite siloed, where actually in their entirety in the way that they overlap will help better if they're coordinated to contribute to the overall climate change targets for the city. So biodiversity, greening strategy, carbon reduction and so on have all been pulled together from an officer point of view, linked into the various portfolios to then report through to the climate change strategy. That's a really clumsy way of saying we've tried to do a bit of housekeeping in the background to make sure that there's a cohesive approach to all of these things. We do have officers present from a range of services. There were a significant number of recommendations, so we could go through each unless you're happy to receive the written response in due course.
I think given the length of the meeting already, I'm happy to receive the written response with the further column to the table, unless other members would like the officers to go through every recommendation. It was long. We produced another aspirational report with, I believe, 33 recommendations, so I think that would take considerable time, so I'm not recommending that to the panel. I do know the recommendations fairly well because I was involved in writing them, but do any of the panel wish the officers to go through all of them? I see no keenness for that, so I might ask one or two specific. Do other members of the panel have any specific questions about the responses and the recommendations on the biodiversity report before I start asking a few? No. So if I start with that point about coordination, I think that was something we tried to capture in our recommendations, but I appreciate we may not have captured perfectly. How has the sort of cross, because as you say, we felt the topic was very broad, it cut across a large number of departments, and what we mostly ended up, I think, recommending was in relation to how departments in different areas doing good work on biodiversity could work closer together. And we were recommending sort of more meetings and bringing together people, as well as having an officer who was responsible for biodiversity as a coordinating point for all of the departments to feed in what they were doing so that other departments could work together and work alongside that. How has that been happening, the cross-department communication? Is there a single point of contact officer in place, and how has that been working across the council?
So the climate strategy then, which has been published and is overseen by the strategy unit, that in itself creates an umbrella strategy which then all of these strands of work can sit under. The coordination of officers has been taking place through a variety of meetings coordinated by Kelly Nash and Christina Downey from the strategy unit, and the climate programme board, which is where officers are held to account for all of the work, has since been refreshed to make sure that we've got all the representatives from all of the various directorates and departments within the City Council, and sits alongside and complements some of the partnership structures which already exist, where we can also discuss climate change, issues around biodiversity, etc. So the structure's been formed, it's settling in, but that will give us a really cohesive approach. We should also say that some of this already existed, we just needed to refresh it, so there's always good operational discussion between parks and open spaces, green and clean and COLAS. There was no need really to reinvent the wheel on that. It was just about giving a sharper focus. So Adrian, Rosier, Phil Bentley, Doug and the teams are now frequently meeting to discuss things like the use of pesticides and how to further our greening strategy and so on. So it was complementary rather than seeking to just simply reinvent the wheel in some instances.
At the time of the report, when we were talking about a single point of contact, I know Councillor Kimberly Barrett was in the process of trying to recruit a senior officer for her department, and there was some discussion of that becoming the single point of contact. Did that occur, or what became of that?
So there's a Green and Healthy City Coordinator, which Public Health have funded for 2 years. We're in discussions as to how to fund that in the longer term. That's a full-time post.
And are they involved with kind of biodiversity coordination on yeah?
Absolutely, that post is linked in, as James said, with the virtual green team and the delivery of maintenance of greening in the city.
The recommendation about producing a biodiversity strategy, to which the kind of the response was said that it was linked into the agendas that kind of already existed, as I read it, and was going to be incorporated to some degree in reports that were already being produced. I don't know if that's a correct reading of that response. But the idea came, partly from discussions with officers, and was around the idea of making sure that the many sites that have individual strategies attached to them, that there was a coordination of those sites so that the same species, the same priorities, the priorities of different sites could be interlinked with an idea of how, what the ideal biodiversity strategy would look like across the whole city, so that the wildlife that might be transient across different areas was able to be, those that stayed in the right place had a focus in the right location, and that came partly from the countryside officer, the Portsdown Hill officer, the landscape architects, talking to different people about how, they felt the management of biodiversity could be improved. Has there been thought given to that question of how the different sites are integrated with then the projects we have on an individual level, and how those might relate to the species that are on the important sites we have, if you see what I mean, across the city?
So I think this is certainly one of those areas where it's a work in progress. The focus at the moment was on the strategy, and you'll recall recently there was a local green charter that was issued which requested signatory from various partner organisations. In some respects that's intended to catalyse that discussion at a more operational level, to say whether or not there's a common standard across the city that can be achieved. We have also recently formed what's called a local estates forum, which brings together significant land and building owners across the city And we've already introduced into that forum the idea of having thematic discussions around, for example, biodiversity, how are we all going to address the challenge of decarbonisation of our buildings, amongst other things. So the forums and structures are there. That's what we can build upon in terms of taking forward some of those discussions. So the update that I'll give you isn't saying that everything's complete by any means, but certainly the work we've done, I hope, will assure you that the foundation's there from which we can pursue some of those more detailed points.
Thank you, Tristan. You.
Just to add to that, so and some of the work in progress is clearly around the local plan and the Reg 19 consultation. There are a series of workshops that are about to come forward once the portfolio holder has his next meeting. Please encourage everyone to engage where you can. There are people who are being allocated to those, but cross-party engagement isn't always as good as it could be, and often people who want to be there can't be there. So just a plea to all of you to delegate if you can't make those, or ask to make sure that your representatives are there, because it's really important that you're involved in those workshops to shape the plan if you want to see the outcomes. So, and that would be quite helpful for officers as much as it will be for the scrutiny panel.
Thank you. And yeah, sorry, I've got to do one at the end. Yeah.
And just to add that we're mindful that when we're tree planting in the city, with all the funding that we've received for tree planting, we've just definitely got a weather eye on the biodiversity corridors and so on that you mentioned, and linking in back to the Estates Forum with bee corridors and other initiatives starting as well, to make sure that we reflect the greening infrastructure plan that is part of the greening strategy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's helpful. I think the point I wanted to make is we were trying to capture this idea that if we plan before we start investing in the projects for, what the end result looks like in terms of species, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of green corridors, in terms of all these ideas at the start, then hopefully we can maximise the value we get out from each thing we spend, because it links into the other things. And that was the idea of the overarching strategy. So I hope that the strategies that are being produced do consider the links between sites and areas and different plans that are going across the city, because that was what we felt perhaps was the key thing we wanted to communicate in that sort of set of recommendations. Any other members of the panel got any questions? On the point of tree planting, I've recently met with residents who feel like the number of trees in their streets, in some streets, has actually declined over the last 10 or 20 years. I was wondering if in response to the report or in general there was any sort of inventory going on of how many trees we currently have, and if there has been an increase or a decline in some streets or areas, because obviously what we wanted to see was the best use of tree planting. Some of our recommendations might have not have hit the mark completely, but our overall intention with the tree planting recommendations was we'd like to see as much of it as possible in the best areas and making maximal use of what they can do throughout the lifespan. And if that means shorter lifespan that you replace often, that's fine, but we would be concerned, and I've been hearing this from residents in one or two streets, that the number of trees has actually declined in their area over the last 20 years. So I was wondering if there's any records being kept of that kind of thing.
My understanding, although it's my officer that works on this closely, is that there is underway an audit, a tree audit. I also understand, James, you can correct me, that any tree that is on council land is replaced with another like for like, so that shouldn't happen. There shouldn't be a decline in canopy cover. Go ahead. Just one thing to add on that is that we've recently received quite a lot of funding from various government bodies and others to increase coverage, canopy coverage, and that's because in particular areas of the city, and particularly those are areas of high deprivation, we've got relatively poor canopy coverage of trees. So the net gain should be there in the next couple of years.
Yeah, on the tree planting, we recently had the prison, Kingston prison, be done. There's about 3 or 4 trees been cut, but there hasn't been any replace plantation. So is there anything that you're aware of, or a few of our resident has made a point of that? and there is no plan of any trees being planted. And then I have been campaigning as well to have more trees in Baffins Road for a year or so almost, but it's like knocking on a, nobody seems to know what's going on.
I don't know the details of it. Obviously, it's a planning application that was taken about 3 years ago, but we'll look into that. Typically, though, any new planning is a net gain, and you've got this 10% gain in biodiversity that's coming forward in through the MPPF at the moment, and it's something we're already pushing through. I'd be surprised if there isn't a requirement for future planting, but also it's a bit, they may have just planted recently, because this is the period now when you normally plant your trees to get, you wouldn't want to plant them in the summer. So we'll look into it, though.
Thank you. I mean, I think the resident concerns I was getting was in relation to trees on streets, and I think it was actually where, you know, the trees colas are responsible for, where sometimes they might not replant because the location is then decided to be unsuitable. I know a lot of work is now being done in relation to flooding in Gosham about how trees can be planted to use and mitigate surface runoff. But I think the tree audit and inventory will be really useful for that point if it can incorporate those kind of ideas. Yeah.
So COLAS is identifying spaces for further planting at the moment. On streets is often not the best. I mean, for every resident who says they want them, there's the person who parks his car underneath them who says he doesn't. And it's also a number of the tree choices made in the past have been incorrect. So COLAS is quite strict now in terms of the type of trees they plant, but they are doing some work which will come back through the portfolio holder around future opportunities. And there are a number of opportunities for tree planting which they're identifying at the moment, some on street and some just within the lands they maintain. And I'm sure other people will have some ideas about where to put them as well.
Thank you very much. I've got basically two more. Sorry, Councillor Ashmore.
Just a quick question. It might be beyond the remit of this meeting, but you mentioned about increasing tree coverage, so I don't know which is the best way to face you when I'm talking like this. But all it is, when I was a portfolio holder of that lot and we were getting petitions and meetings with environmental groups who wanted to double tree coverage, but people are saying if you increase tree coverage too much, that can actually do more harm than good, or it's not always accessible. So there was a process of trying to increase greenery rather than just increase trees. And I was just wondering if trees cannot be replaced because COLAS or the relevant officers have determined it's not possible, is there something in place to say then we'll investigate putting other greenery in it rather than just trees?
A lot of the focus is about biodiversity, so wildflower meadows, encouraging bees and pollinators and all that sort of stuff. So absolutely, it's the right product for the right area. You can't have anything that obscures sight lines, so you need to think about it. Trees are the right thing in some areas, not necessarily the right thing in others. So yes, there's no one size fits all. We're looking to increase biodiversity, which covers both sides of that.
I'll ask briefly about people in housing associations and council housing particularly, because one of the recommendations or set of recommendations was around trying to make sure that those people that might want to garden or plant or use the green space around their council properties that might be communal had a clear point of contact and a clear set of rules they could follow about whether or not they were allowed to and when they were allowed to. And I wonder, has a policy on that been put in place? Is there now a line of communication that council tenants have on that point?
So it isn't in place yet, although, again, when you get the report through, you'll see that we're referencing a spring launch, the right season really for this, but that will see a refresh of some policies which already exist but we accept need to be more visible. There'll be a specific web page, this is linked to council housing, which will show people how they can pull on support for the management of communal space and other things. So again, all of the recommendations, particularly for council housing, will form part of a launch in spring. So watch this space. In terms of housing associations, as we alluded to earlier in the meeting, there are the shared forums now in which we can say, look, we're doing this, what are you doing, and just create those conversations where we can share good practice across social housing landlords in the city.
Thank you very much. That's good news. Last question was allotments. So one of the things that actually triggered the whole thing was allotments. Quite a lot of the responses in terms of education seemed to be the suggestion there was a lot already available. We had recommended kind of trying to coordinate that in a single place and give. We also discussed the idea of banning pesticides because we wanted to be ambitious, we wanted to be firm in our recommendations. That was the view of the panel, and we recognised there could be practicality issues with that, but we wanted to make a strong, firm recommendation on the point. Part of the response has come back around education. Has any new educational material been produced, or perhaps we do something like a particular point of contact at each allotment association who's responsible for that, and only a voluntary, because there was a lot of voluntary willingness to help guide allotment holders in how they might plant, how they might use their allotments, and how they might create biodiversity spaces that didn't attract dirty plot notices. We felt all of this was addressable with education, but it did seem like one of the responses were that education is already available. Can we do more to make it well known and accessible? And have we done nothing on that front?
Parks have a dedicated allotment officer, and he works very closely with the allotment associations on doing joint inspections. And part of that joint inspection is to try and educate the associations and the plot holders on good plot cultivation and the reasons for holding an allotment plot, and to actively encourage non-use of pesticides. The feedback we get, I don't think there's a huge use of pesticides on allotment plots. Yeah, I think that sort of counteracts partly the purpose of someone growing their own vegetables. And part of the allotment officer's job as well, we contacted all the existing allotments to get them actively encouraged in those joint inspections, and to educate and guide plot holders on maintaining their plots. A lot of the associations do have their own Facebook pages, some of them have their own web pages where that education can be passed on through those social media streams.
Thank you. The part of the report, we noted the excellent work of the allotment officer and how much work he actually has to do. So part of it was trying to say, well, is there other things that can support him in his work? But again, it was aspirational, and I appreciate funding is always limited and allotments are always a challenge. But I did want to note that as the report was actually triggered by a question around the policy on allotments and dirty plots, notices if you were creating biodiversity space. But I think ultimately we found there wasn't a policy issue, but perhaps it was an educational one. So I just wanted an update on that. Are there any further questions or comments from the panel? Thank you very much. Well, I think that concludes all the items on the agenda. Thank you very much, officers.
Ask a question about a couple of things,
sure,
actually,
yes.
if that's okay.
Sorry.
It really relates to scrutiny recommendations, and I did have some correspondence last year on this issue about following up scrutiny recommendations. On that. One of the ones I put into my correspondence related to one that was done by the Economic Development, Culture and Leisure Scrutiny Panel in relation to Portsmouth International Port. It's not on the agenda today, and that report was done in August 2019. As far as I'm aware, the recommendations were sent directly to the port, but we haven't really had a feedback on whether those were done. I mean, some of them said capital funding needs to be identified, etc. So I wonder if some point we might ask whether we could have a report back on that, because I do think that's an interesting one. It was done quite a while ago. It obviously hit just before COVID. It probably wasn't picked up. I couldn't see when it went to Cabinet. It probably did, but I couldn't find it. But it'd be just worth having, I thought, having recommendations on that. I did actually say include that in some correspondence when we were talking about these. So that's just a question, and I wanted to make a suggestion as well after that.
Certainly, yeah. No, that makes sense. Perhaps we should put it on the agenda for a future meeting. I'm not sure I'd propose it for the next meeting, as that is specifically for budget scrutiny. I don't know if you're in agreement with that.
The second point was a suggestion, and it came out of something that I had interest in, and maybe members don't have an interest in it and don't think it's worth pursuing, but I'm just wondering whether it's something we might consider for scrutiny, because actually the issue I'm going to mention is not topic specific or department specific. You may know that the City Council has done quite a lot, particularly in some areas, on what we call systems thinking, to change the way in which we do processes. And I know housing was pioneering in that respect and did quite a bit, and I know other parts of the City Council have taken up as well. I must admit I've slightly lost track of where it's got to. I just wondered if it would be worth considering what the impact of systems thinking processes has been within particular departments that have done it. You know, have there been clear benefits shown in terms of working, in terms of the relationship with our residents who use services, and in terms of the officers' ability to do their jobs? Because clearly, if you're changing systems and processes, sometimes when managers do that, people complain it makes life more difficult. I know certainly we say that at the university sometimes, but maybe it's positive. I just wondered if we might. And also the other element of that is are there other areas where we would consider or should consider taking that forward? Because I don't know if that has been, and in a sense that's my suggestion. I'm not saying we should necessarily agree to do a review on that now. I think maybe to take it away for a bit of consideration and maybe come back to members to say, well, yeah, we could do this because it would be worthwhile. There is scope to do it. But obviously that's a suggestion I have, which may or may not get fully taken up. But I just wanted to put that on the table, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Do any of the officers present want to comment briefly on systems thinking? Perhaps, yeah.
So the Systems Development Service, which is our internal team that support various bits of the organisation to apply the methods, still exists. They're still very busy working across the City Council. They actually come under my wing. They're part of my directorate, but they work in a corporately and with partners. Very happy to answer any questions on that. Happy to take that offline if you want to check in on what they're doing and the progress over the last few years, as to whether or not that then is sufficient to come through scrutiny. But yeah, happy to pick that up.
I think that makes sense.
So maybe I have a conversation with James and I'll come back and talk to you about it at some other point. If we,
Yeah, I wonder if what we should propose to do is, so obviously we have already scheduled the budget scrutiny meeting for February, and perhaps in the meantime we should have an email discussion between members of the scrutiny panel about whether or not we wish to review the recommendations that were made to the port. I may actually have slightly headed that off in a conversation I had with James when I said that so much has happened at the port, but if we would like to look at it, I think that would potentially still be a helpful thing to look at. But obviously it may be that it might produce a requirement for, say, the economic panel itself to actually look at the port again, because it has changed so substantially in the last few years and they have such significant new plans. But certainly I think we could have a conversation about whether we review that, and perhaps at the same time also we'll discuss whether or not we as a panel, because I'm not sure there's a specific panel that would make sense to look at systems management, so whether or not we want to do a short review about how systems management is functioning in the Council. I know it's not always normal for Scrutiny Management Panel to produce a report, but I don't think it's impossible for us to do so if we wanted to look at it. But I don't know, James may have thoughts on whether there's a specific panel that might be better suited. But should we have those conversations via email after the meeting?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. The reason I said it was I don't think it is a topic-specific one. It's one that crosses all sorts of areas, so it might be more appropriate for us to do it rather than someone else. So that was my idea. Yeah.
Excellent. So that's all good. We'll have that conversation after the meeting. Thank you very much to everyone for attending, and thank you, members. I'll see members again at the budget scrutiny meeting. And what was the date we'd confirmed, James?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It might be an opportune time just to air that date. Originally, it was set up the 3rd of February, but because the Cabinet and Council meetings have moved by 2 weeks, it will now be on the 17th of February. So that's the same Friday, 3:15, but 2 weeks later. So the 17th rather than the 3rd.
Thank you very much. And I will therefore close this meeting at 1:06 p.m. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everybody.